All right, so this week's topic is hobos. I'm trying to think what made us decide to choose this, but I thought it'd be fun to kind of get off of the music track that we'd been doing for a bit and kind of do something that's a little bit of history, a lot of culture, and a lot of just like general American observations.
Yeah, and I think with hobos that there's this idea that like the word hobo is just a euphemism for homeless people, but it's more like whimsical or wacky. But actually, they were a type of migrant worker and they had a very complex shared system of values and expectations for each other when traveling on the road. And I just think that there's like a lot that people can learn because I kind of knew a lot of things, I think, before doing research for this week's episode. But even me, I felt like I only knew part of the picture before. So there's like a lot to learn about hobo life.
I think my like main knowledge of hobos before this, I mean, besides like what you learn in like history class in passing, it's never like a unit. There's never a hobo unit or anything. But it was the American Girl doll books. I don't know if you were exposed to those, but because of my older sister, we had a lot of American Girl doll books. And my sister had to choose between either getting Samantha or Kit. And Samantha was the Jewish one, and so that was a shoo-in. But then Kitt Kittredge had like a short blonde bob, and that's what my sister had at the time. And then so she ended up going with Kitt Kittredge, who takes place in the 1930s. And so that's why I thought that was the height of the hobo. Learned that's not the case.
But Kitt Kittredge was a hobo?
No. So she was. So she's a girl living in the Great Depression. Her family is feeling the squeeze, and they take on additional boarders. And there's also like a hobo who passes through town, and they like. She thinks she rides on a boxcar at some point, and she visits a hobo jungle. But yeah, and then I think they make some mention of like hobo code and like hobo symbols and that kind of stuff. Yeah.
That's a nice story, but there are not little girls in hobo jungles.
No, like now that I think about it, I'm like, oh man, there's really a sanitized version of that.
Yeah, because when researching the early history of hobos, one of the reasons for why hobos were primarily and almost exclusively men was that factory work was like mostly women's work to a degree, or like factory owners would prefer to hire women first because they could hire them for lower wages. Same with children. And so the unemployment rate for men was like higher to a degree. Or like if you were a man who wanted to seek work, it was harder for you to get a job than a woman who wanted to seek work.
They were like just generally not overqualified, but like, I don't know exactly. Like there was a high level of work that they had to do, I guess. I mean, not level in terms of complexity, but like.
I mean, when the hobo became a cultural figure in 1870, and up until when it sort of disappeared in 1940, it was during this time period that like manual labor was like very highly valued. There was not as much desk work. There was not as much creative work. And so, I mean, men could TBH, they are stronger. So like they could perform more manual labor. And I mean, that could be a reason, but I also think it was just like cultural to a degree where like men were expected to have families and they could like negotiate higher wages given that premise and things like that.
So yeah, the origins of the hobo basically start much earlier than I thought. It starts like kind of immediately after the Civil War.
Yeah, and it sort of started to a degree because Civil War veterans needed to return home from both sides of the conflict. And they like railroads were very small, in 1870, there were only a handful. Each year, like railroads could double in size, grow longer. Eventually there were transcontinental railroads, but in the beginning it was just like Civil War veterans traveling home. And along the way they might stop and perform some work. And then this sort of became entrenched, and there started to be on the farmer's side, like they would value the migratory labor when it was harvest season. But then when it wasn't harvest season, like what is there to do?
Yeah, people were kind of pressured out, like they had overstayed their welcome, basically.
Yeah. But there would be like temporary work all across the country, whether it be in like mines, on farms, or like logging. There was this need for like temporary work that existed outside of cities.
Yeah. I should have written down where this was from, but like the fact this was not rare is really kind of crazy. This was like a large and like important part of the labor market in a way that you could say that like the country kind of hinged, the country needed hobos basically.
Yeah.
I always thought that hobos were people like kind of trying to squeak by, you know, just like free spirited people. And I'm sure some of them definitely were. Like there's people who I think whatever time they're born in, they were going to be a hobo, you know, like they just kind of have that like in them. But the like, it was something like of 10 million like young able-bodied male workers in America, 3 million were hobos. Were traveling workers. So like in terms of what you call them a hobo, but they were like people who had to travel for work is kind of crazy.
Yeah, that 3 million number also does ring a bell for me too. But the number of like hobo workers, like, or the number of hobos was in flux over time, given the labor market, broader like socioeconomic conditions. Like it did boom around the Great Depression, not to get too far ahead in the timeline. But around the Great Depression, like there started to be women and children on the road in higher numbers, and as well as more men. I think it was as many as 6 million people on the road. Yeah. So it did like go up and down over time.
And when I like got to that part, we read this book on hobos basically for research. But I'm like, man,
do you want to say the name?
Oh yeah, Hobos Wandering in America, 1870 to 1940, which is a very useful block of time for us. That like really 70 years. That's like a very long period. You could fully like live your life as a hobo. Yeah,
those dates being in the title of the book make it easy to remember.
Very useful. But yeah, with the Great Depression, I was just kind of thinking like, if everyone's a hobo, is anyone a hobo? You know, if so many people were moved out of their homes and traveling in search of work, like it brings like the average status of an American closer and closer to a hobo. The hobo is not rising in status any. He's probably lower too as well in terms of
I mean,
power.
I think that society became not necessarily that there was like more help to give, but I think that people became less like contemptful of people who were out of work during that time period. I saw the same thing during the Great Recession where like
people came.
There were people like I overheard conversations like, oh yes, like people need to, you know, lift themselves up by their bootstraps, but then someone else in the room would be like, oh no, but I mean, there's a lot of people right now who want work but can't get it, and people become more sympathetic when there's big events like that.
Yeah, I think it's definitely like been worked into the kind of stories that we tell ourselves about both the war and the Great Depression, was that it was this time that really like brought everyone together and everyone pitched in. England has a similar version of that. They call it like the Blitz mentality. I forget what it was, but it's like, oh, when they were all getting bombed all the time, they all came together and became like patriots that also like leaned on each other. It's just like part of their like natural storytelling myth.
Basically. Yeah, or even during the early part of the pandemic when there started to be like community fridges that popped up in the middle of sidewalks.
People clapping at night for care workers and stuff. So going back to the very early beginnings, the fact that these early hobos were basically like Civil War veterans largely, this is always a reoccurring theme, I think, in modern wars. I don't know, they always say that Civil War was like one of the first modern wars, up there with, what's the other one? The Crimean War. That one was also more similar to, you know, modern conflict than it is to like the previous like pitched battle type of like medieval combat almost. But yeah, there just doesn't seem to be a place, like some people can easily reintegrate into society with anything like higher status than they had, you know, before the war. Like they were like, they benefited the most from the military, and then other people just couldn't. And so like society, they had to kind of make a place for themselves. Like post World War II, like we picture veterans coming back and like either using the GI Bill to get a college degree and becoming like a successful businessman, Don Draper type kind of thing.
Yeah.
Or they had like a well-paying factory job, you know, and they could support like 4 kids and like a whole house, a whole single family home in the suburbs on like just working in a tool and die factory. But I think the forgotten part of that is like there were guys who couldn't readjust and were probably from rougher backgrounds. And that's where the first like outlaw biker gangs and stuff start. Yeah. And then I think with Vietnam, like we only picture the people who didn't readjust. Like there were people who of course like served their time in Vietnam, came back, lived a normal life. But I think we almost picture like the Forrest Gump version of that, of like Lieutenant Dan or so, like someone who just like is too broken from war to return to like the regular 9 to 5 and has to find their own place.
Yeah. I mean, life back then was hard though. I think a lot of people had hard lives even before the wars, because there were things like infant mortality and There's a lot of
just like
hard stuff that you had to deal with.
Child labor. And like, as we kind of mentioned earlier, like that just being like a pretty accepted thing that we had to like cumulatively over years, like work back the working age.
Yeah, no, children used to actually be a plus on a family's finances. Like they were able to earn more money than they like took to a degree. I mean, particularly on farms, like extra hands, like, like it just multiplies the amount of like work that can get done if the more people that you have. But yeah, now children are seen exclusively as like a net drain on a family's finances, to the degree actually that studies show that if teenagers work in high school, they have like negative consequences the rest of their life. Like even if they start working at 16, 17, 18, it's like, they like have reduced economic potential the rest of their lives.
Wow. It's like, I could see people taking away from that, like, oh, I shouldn't have my kid work. But it's like, no, it's like, that's the symptom, not the cause of that. Like, it's just, if you are working very early in high school, like there's other stuff going on, basically. I always really bought into like the importance of the high school job. I just had like a landscaping job that I'd work sometimes. My sister worked much more than me in high school. She worked at JCPenney's. Someone was telling me they had a friend who just like starting around 14 or 15, he just started driving to construction sites to work as a kid. He had no license, nothing. And he was just like, that's just what he did. And like eventually he got caught and he was like, whatever. And I remember during my like licensing to get my driver's license in Las Vegas, there was some, as I read the rules about it, there's like some exemption you can actually get when like, if you're 15, you can like petition the state and say like, my family needs my income, so I need like a full driver's license at 15 instead of a provisional license at 15 and a half. I don't know. I could be misremembering that, but
Wow. Yeah. My brother actually did construction work with a family member when he was a teenager, and he got like so strong and it like stayed with him for years, like all the like lifting, more so than if he was just working out at a gym. It's just that like, those repetitive motions throughout the day like really added up for him.
Yeah, I felt so like strong when I did my landscaping stuff. I don't know, like, but I felt like so thoroughly beat up at the end of it. Like, it is crazy. You do like have to learn how to lift properly. But then I don't know, like working in construction, I see guys who have like terrible like lifting form, and they make fun of me when I like lift with my legs and like squat down to grab stuff and all that. And I'm like, I don't know, man, joke's on you when you blow out your lower back. Like, you got to do it right.
Yeah. But yeah, I think the next section we should get into is just like the core elements of the hobo lifestyle. But I want to like really get this in people's heads. So trains are why hobos came into existence, and the invention of the automobile is why like hobos phased out. It's like trains are like very, very integral to hobos, because prior to trains, there were like itinerant workers. There were like troubadours, people who'd like travel around for the towns to like sing or perform. And then there are also like tinkers, like people who'd go town to town fixing pots or other things.
But with like horse and carriage, like you'd also have to own a horse and carriage to make any kind of headway, like travel wise. And traveling was much more of a group thing. I was reading just like some medieval historical fiction thing, and like people in like pilgrimage groups would be like 60 to 100 people. It's just like easier and safer to move like that.
Collective bet setting.
What?
That's something from biology. It's why like fishes school together, why like birds flock together. It's because like when you're in numbers, your odds of survival go up.
Yeah. I always heard that like zebras, despite looking like horses, are not like communal animals like horses are. Like two zebras like will hate each other basically, but they're always like, you see them in large groups together, and that's purely just for survival. That's like, there's no conviviality there between zebras.
You want to hear something crazy about zebras? So the reason why they have stripes is not so that they can camouflage to hide from predators like lions and other carnivores. The stripes, it turns out, deter mosquitoes. So they're actually, which makes sense because, mosquitoes kill humans more than any other animal. And like mosquitoes in nature, they also kill mammals more than other mammals kill mammals. So like it could also be like two different things at once. There's this word in like called an umwelt, which is basically like in biology, like,
two birds with one stone kind of features.
No. An umwelt is when it's like the perspective of a viewer, but it means a lot in biology because like, a flower could be white to our eyes because we see like a certain wavelength, but then it could be like on an ultraviolet wavelength to a certain insect, it could be a different color. And so like the umwelt, the like individual perspective, it could be like, it's
Welt, like the German like word for world, basically. It's like your like the lens by way like that you look at something, basically. That like humans have stripes too. I've also heard that they're just not visible like to our wavelengths, but we have like stripes, and I think that's like maybe we have a light version of the like mosquito repelling stripes. Obviously, yeah. I need to research that more. I don't know, but yeah, that's something I've heard about. But
back to
Hobos.
Back to Hobos.
But yeah, the freight train is like, it's crazy to think about the sheer amount of like the idea of stowing away on a train. Like you could stow away on a boat back in the day, definitely. But like, I don't think you could really get away with stowing away on like a horse and carriage. Like they would notice if there was like 170 extra pounds. But there's something about like just how efficient and powerful rail travel is over other stuff that just like, it's crazy how hard, like, so hobos have this relationship with rail yard bulls, which is what they call the security like officers and the cops who basically like shoo them out of rail yards, because rail yards wouldn't want hobos to be on there. But all the reasons I found were kind of flimsy. It felt like, yeah, it's a security thing. Like a hobo could steal something. They would often make fires to keep themselves warm in boxcars. That I get, that's dangerous. You don't want having that. But like, what harm are they doing? Like, I don't know. And they're not like dragging down. Like there can't be thousands of pounds of hobos on a train.
Yeah, no, it wasn't about the weight, but the fires I think were the biggest cause for concern. But yeah, like freight trains, they like by this time period, they were able to get it down to like train travel only being 2 times more expensive than like sea travel, which was crazy for land, because prior to this, like, as you mentioned, like horse and carriage, like that would be like many multiples more expensive than traveling by sea. But the fact they're able to get it down to only being twice as much was like monumental.
It's crazy though, like before we had railroads, just the differential between sea and land travel. Like we had just like, you could travel so far by boat and it was just like pulling teeth to get any amount of like distance over land. It was crazy.
Yeah. But yeah, so we've really pegged down trains. And now we can get to some of the other core elements of the hobo lifestyle. So a misperception I think people have is that, you know, again, hobo just means homeless, and what homeless, like the homeless people we see today live the same lives that hobos did, you know, maybe plus trains. But most people probably think that hobos ask for money or asked for money as their main source of income and sustenance. But that was actually like a last resort. They would do it periodically, say like they got robbed. You don't have any other options if you get robbed, like you don't have shoes. There are situations in which like they would need to ask for help from the public, but that was like a last resort.
Yeah, and so we can talk about the different like definitions. So we've got a quote here from Ben Reitman, and he'll pop up later as we get to like the 1900s, 1910s, and also talking about Chicago. But Ben Reitman was this like doctor who really saw himself as like a friend to the hobo and like an advocate for them, basically. Yeah. And he said there are 3 types of the genus vagrant: the hobo, the tramp, and the bum. The hobo works and wanders, the tramp dreams and wanders, and the bum drinks and wanders. I've heard some differences on this.
Yeah.
I've heard like tramps will work when like forced, when needed to, basically, in order to have a more extended period of not working. But hobos really see themselves as like a working traveler. And then bums drinking and wandering. I've heard that bums stay in one place.
Yeah.
I've also heard that
like
too.
They're more so like immobile, and but they'll leave town if like the cops are after them. That would be a situation where they would.
And so definitely like the homeless people we see nowadays, like I'm not going to start calling them bums, but they would fit if we have this like typology here, they would be more on the bum side. And I think that like, especially homeless people are very reliant on like their networks, like on the opposite of travel, on staying in one place where their networks are. I listened to this, I don't know why I did this. I listened to this really long multi-part podcast about like homelessness in Oakland and like San Francisco. And they follow this one woman in her like journey to try and get like subsidized housing. And there's this bit where like she's offered housing like just outside of Oakland, and she's like, I will not take that. I need to be in Oakland. And the interviewer kind of like speaks to the listener in this and like, we know how this sounds. Like there's plenty of people who like, there's plenty of working like middle class people who are like, oh no, we couldn't afford Oakland, we had to move out. But there's this homeless woman who's like, no, sorry, I have to stay here. But she is more reliant on her network and resources in Oakland than the average person is. The average person can like set up just outside of Oakland or something, and grocery shop, have an apartment, have a job, all that kind of stuff. But like, yeah, they're much more reliant on their immediate resources.
Yeah, I mean, that reminds me too of, I was helping someone in the library a couple of months ago, and I was helping them apply for an application with the Chicago Housing Authority to get like free housing. And as part of the application, there was this one building. It was actually complex. There were all these sections for different types of housing. But one of the things that was an option was this residence on like 13th Street, I think. And she was flabbergasted when I was like, oh, do you want this one? And it was just like a yes, no thing. Like it was not,
you don't
like,
have to add color to it. Yeah, but she did.
It was not like she was picking this residence over other places. It was like, yes or no, this one place. And she was like, 13th Street. I live on the south side. And I was like, no, to me as a north sider, it's like all numbered streets are the south side. And technically they are. But to her, and like around where we are in like the 40s, 50s, it's like, it was like crazy to her. And she was like, no. But I mean, it really proves the point, though, that like people, the happiest they are is in their community. Yeah, it's not moving.
Yeah, people have a very strong sense of that. It's interesting to hear because people always bring up like, oh, people on the north side, like once they see the numbered streets, they get scared. I even heard someone say, it was this like Jewish girl who said like, oh, my dad always said that once the streets start being named after presidents, you got to turn around. Which is crazy because like half the loop is in that area, which is like, that's where the jobs are. I've like never heard that. Like, I'm like, I knew she had like some rich business dad. And it's like, is he saying to only stay in River North? Because like, that's not even where most of the like office well-paying high rises are. Like those are in streets with names like Madison and Clinton and stuff.
Also, there's so many like random presidents that the average American has never even heard their name, like Polk. Right?
Yeah, Polk Street, yeah.
It's like, we have a street named Polk.
Yeah, and then I said Clinton, but that's not named after like Bill Clinton. That's named after some like previous old Clinton politician.
Yeah. And then another, so to circle back to the Ben Reitman quote, another thing to like point out is, so hobos, tramps, bums, tramps are dangerous. So because they're not actually working for their money, oftentimes they will steal from both hobos and non-hobos. And they'll also kill in the process. So hobos had to be really on alert for like what were called vampire gangs. They mentioned that in the book we read.
The vampire, that really stood out to me. Like,
yeah, they were just tramp gangs, and so they would steal. And some of them were specialized in like blowing up safes.
Yeah, I saw that. They had a cool name. I forgot it, but yeah, it's like the hobo lingo we'll like lightly touch on here because hobo lingo. And then hobo like symbols. I think the lingo is definitely a thing. People do just naturally like create words and like a jargon for when they have to like, express things quickly and to other people. The symbols I'm a little more skeptical of. I think that's kind of wishful, maybe historical revisionism. Like we want to believe there was like a commonly understood like symbology, I guess. But yeah, I think the slang is definitely a thing.
Yeah.
I couldn't keep track of all of it, and I should have written down some of my favorite ones on here because it's kind of wild. Some of the terms.
I mean, I thought that the word for like railroad cop was funny. It was like railroad dick.
Oh yeah, the detectives. That was like, I don't know. How are they detectives? It's such an easy crime, like to solve. Like, oh, that person's in a railroad yard and they shouldn't be.
But before solved. Identification, trying to figure out who someone was, they could just make it up. Yeah.
Hard. But yeah, so asking for money, definitely like a part more so on the tramp and bum side. Yeah. But yeah, so migrant and seasonal work, that defined the hobo. I think hobos just had this like Protestant work ethic. They saw themselves as like workers. I don't know if they saw themselves as like integral to the American economy, but I mean, you definitely feel necessary when there's like a field of wheat that needs to get threshed and like you're doing it. But,
they were very integral during like the Midwestern harvest season, though. They were allowed to travel on trains openly during that time period because it was so important for the U.S. economy.
Yeah. I think that's like Yeah, they were so necessary but so like hated. I don't know what people wanted instead of hobos. Like what was the ideal situation? Like that they wouldn't look so rough? Is that the thing? Like was it an
Yeah.
optics issue?
I mean, I think that there
Um
was misperception that they were workers.
mhm.
Like I've been reading this book too on Ben Reitman, who again we'll mention later. But I just got to this chapter where like there was someone else who was trying to solve the hobo problem, and his perspective was that it was just like a matter of just character. Like, yeah, these
Yeah.
people aren't working because they don't want to. And it's not because of broader economic problems. And
There's
so
always
he
gonna
thought
be
the
people like
solution
that.
was to just like double down on anti-vagrancy laws and to double down and hire more railroad cops. And the solution to getting rid of hobos was to like get them off the railroads, make them stay in one place, and then they'll start working.
It just sounds has so many parallels to like how we talk about homelessness today.
Yeah.
You know, that we still use that. And it's I don't know, I think there is like nuances you can talk about. Like I used to be a very pro like just housing first above all else person when it came to homelessness. And like from what I've read now, I realize that does not really apply in substance abuse situations. And those things it's like
Yeah.
sobriety first and then housing and then everything else. But yeah, these people aren't even talking about that. They're just like, all right, these people are deeply flawed moral like
Yeah.
failures, and we need to like just crack down on them until they start to change.
Yeah. No, I mean, I work with homeless people, libraries. I once saw them described in a paper from the library science field as being functionally daytime shelters.
Yeah.
There are a lot of homeless people. And even with my own coworkers, I think that they like misinterpret the homeless population. Like they think the majority have substance use problems and mental health problems, but it's not even like half.
Yeah.
But I mean, it does depend on the city to a degree, but yeah, it's like people have contempt for them in the same way today that they did, you know, for hobos 100 years ago.
Yeah. What else? Yeah. And then so in the like as they would look for work, like the way they described the working market back then is crazy. Like we get, I mean, now we talk about like, you know, that certain jobs are so crazy in demand that, you know, travel nurses pay like 200, get paid like $200,000 a year or something. But basically like hobos had to like work so hard to find work.
Yeah.
And so you'd find work through these things called slave markets, which I guess we should like talk about the racial angle of this of like hobos were mostly white because you just couldn't get away with this as a black person, basically.
Well, in this time period, America in general was 90% white.
Yeah.
And the only like quote unquote major or like large minority group were Black Americans. So there were black hobos, and we'll get to hobo jungles in a second, but hobo jungles and hobo culture was accepting of hobos of other races, but individual hobos could be prejudiced, and there were like tramp gangs that were like notoriously racist, but overall like hobo life was like pretty accepting of black people, homosexuals, political radicals, but we'll get to all that in a bit.
Yeah.
But yeah, there was this like example I found in Hobos Wandering America where there was this individual hobo who traveled between 17 states in a given year, only to find 6 weeks of work, which that's like much less than average, but that's crazy.
Yeah. I just, we had this surplus of people. Like what was causing this? There truly wasn't enough work to go around. Like, and it's not even a mismatch. You know, if you think about it, like that the jobs are in different places of the people, like the people are now able to more freely travel than ever. Like I think a very purely market look at this should be like, wait, we've eliminated the barriers. This problem should solve itself. That's how they kind of like always look at things. But
Yeah.
it just wasn't the case. Yeah. So these slave markets were just like, seemed to be a lot of people who made their living off of ripping off hobos, it seems, or just like of people in need. And so these slave markets would just like post jobs, and then they'd require a fee to like reserve the job, and they'd just steal the fee. They would just make up jobs out of nowhere. But yeah, those were like super messed up. I just wonder if like, I don't know, whenever I hear about stuff like this in history, I'm like, where is their family now? Like, because everyone I think tells pretty rosy stories about their like relatives. Like I have a relative who's like an ostrich feather salesman. And I was like, oh, it's a fun thing to say. But like, no one's like, oh yeah, my great grandpa ran a like evil business that would rip off hobos with the promise of work. Like, I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, once you get past the third generation, Americans are described as being kin poor, where like they can't even name their cousins or their aunts and uncles. And this extends even to just like your ancestors. Like Americans don't value their larger family outside of the nuclear family in a way that's like not very common amongst the anthropological record.
Yeah, no. I don't know. I feel like my family on both the Jewish and the Catholic side like talk kind of crazily far back. I'd say further back on the Jewish side, which is interesting because we like know, I think, less and less. Like we're definitely less established than the Catholic side there, but it just feels like there's a pretty strong like oral history about people who lived in the 1890s, which is kind of crazy to think about.
Yeah. For me, like growing up, understanding my own family was very complex and I had to put a lot of work into that. As
just learning your nuclear family must have been pretty hard.
Yeah, because I have 4 siblings that are technically my cousins that were adopted by my parents, and they had 4 other siblings. And then I have a lot of other like random long lost relatives too. Like I have a long lost aunt. I have like 2 long lost brothers. Like there's a lot of stuff going on. So for me, just understanding the living was like complex enough.
Yeah, no, you got enough on your plate. Definitely.
Yeah.
So we can talk about the hobo jungle too. So this would be like an informal settlement they'd have kind of just out of town, basically, or close to a rail yard as well, just kind of in a forest clearing where they'd set up a place to like, they always talk about shaving a lot. Like they'd have a place that has some water to shave.
Yeah.
And this was, I don't know, so the 70-year period we have here sees both like one of the highest peaks and the lowest troughs of having a beard in America. Cause like in the 1880s and 90s, like presidents had beards, titans of industry had beards. One of the reasons I've heard for it, like among the elite, was this was during like the Greek revival, basically. So people were looking to like, Socrates and Plato and all these guys had like beards that conveyed wisdom. So hobos would have beards, average people would have beards. But then like the 30s and 40s was like the lowest period of beards and facial hair in America. And then so I think that hobo cleanliness is talked about like a strange amount in the book. They kind of prided themselves on that. I think it was a way to differentiate themselves from tramps and bums. Basically, like I'm a trustworthy working guy. I'm able to shave my face almost every day. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I even see that as being important for some of the homeless people I work with at the library. Like, it's important for them to be clean shaven because then people are nicer to them. Society is generally not nice to them. So that means a lot. But yeah, the hobo jungles some of them were temporary and would only last a night. Others were like year-long things. One actually there's a hobo jungle near Lake Michigan, near where the Field Museum is. There was one along the lake. And that was like a permanent year-long thing. But generally, like hobos in the winter would really need to get to like places indoors. Like they would stay in some towns would allow like hobos to stay in the jail cells for the winter.
Just for winter, yeah.
Yeah, other hobos would like save money throughout the year, come to Chicago, stay in a hobo hotel, things like that. But yeah, the jungles had rules like that generally like came from the hobo ethical code that we'll talk about. But yeah, they were like places of rest. But there was a lot of conversation, like as they were cooking, cleaning, they were talking constantly. There was like to a degree, like this certain anonymity to it that kind of reminds me of like modern day forums or like Reddit.
Yeah. People
because
just
like
passing through.
Yeah. You never knew who would be there and like who would chime in, and there'd be like crazy perspectives, and the conversation would change like out of the blue. And
it's interesting. I don't know. Just like I always picture them around a campfire, cooking like beans, like in the can.
Mulligan stew.
Mulligan stew, yeah, that's always brought up as just like kind of a shitty stew brought together of just like whatever stuff they had lying around. Yeah. And they had like one of the lingo terms was just like, it was just like for chicken, like having a little bit of chicken. They had like a phrase for that. And I was like, come on, man, just call it chicken. Like they got a little enthusiastic with the lingo.
Yeah. And then one other thing about jungles that I find is interesting is just that they used a natural term to describe like where they would dwell. They could have chosen something domestic like hobo city, hobo camp, but instead they went with jungle, which just sounds like supernatural.
All right, back to it. We just talked about jungles.
And then let's probably talk about Chicago a bit more. So as we just mentioned, there was like this hobo jungle close to the Field Museum. But there were other like very important locations in hobo culture in Chicago because it was like what was described as being like a winter resort for the hobo. So there was West Madison Street, and this is not like the whole entirety of like West Madison Street. This was specifically between Des Plaines Street and Jefferson Street. And then there was also Bughouse Square. And we can talk a little bit though about hobos generally in Chicago first.
Yeah. So there was these hobo colleges, the Ben Reitman character we talked about earlier. Basically, there was like a larger kind of progressive outreach movement in cities at the time. Like they wanted to integrate immigrants. They wanted to, like provide resources for them to integrate into America, and also labor organizing. And then these like hobo colleges kind of came out of that movement as well. And there was one operating in Chicago, and they would teach guys like working skills, and they'd teach them like also higher minded things, like more conventional college things.
Yeah. That wasn't necessarily the main draw, though. I want to circle back to that. The main draws were that like Chicago was like the railroad capital.
Yeah, all the roads, all the like pre-Chicago fire, all the rail lines basically like converged in Chicago.
Yeah.
And so that's something people point to of like why they didn't just give up on Chicago and why they rebuilt it. Like it's like its natural resource is its location and also the infrastructure that had been dedicated to it, basically.
Yeah, even today, Illinois is like, I think that Illinois moves the second highest volume of freight per year. I think Texas is number one for some reason now. But pretty much any east-west connection has been routed through Chicago. And so there's huge rail yards in Chicago to this day. So that was like a main like draw. Another thing that's interesting is that the cities in this time period were still cheaper than small towns and the countryside.
Yeah.
Which makes sense. It should be like that today. I think we might live in like some sort of like small towns paradox where like the federal government just subsidizes like rural places so much that then the goods there are cheaper arbitrarily. But yeah, back in the day, like goods could be bought in Chicago for cheaper. So like hobos coming to Chicago could buy like a whole new wardrobe. They could eat out at like nice restaurants. Like they had a good time.
Yeah. It's like, it's an economy of scale kind of thing. Like when you do have density, like some people agree with me on this, some people don't, but I feel like the times I've been in New York City, like in Manhattan, like just getting random things like a croissant, a coffee, a beer, like seems cheaper than in Chicago because they don't have our sales tax. We have like the highest sales tax in the nation. But also like since there's just so much more foot traffic and throughput, like the best example is the dollar pizza slice. Like that economic model is only possible in New York City, of course. And you just need to like fully get people through to basically like subsidize it.
Yeah, when I'm in New York City, I notice the prices. Like I remember one time going into like a McDonald's or something in New York City and the dollar menu starting at $2.50 or something and being like, that's not a dollar menu.
I don't think Chicago is much better, is what I'd say.
No, it is.
Yeah.
Like, for example, like I would go to, I oftentimes shop at Whole Foods, TBH. I went to Whole Foods in New York City and like their muffins were double the price here, for example. So no, like the cost is palpable when you're out there.
I don't know. I went to Keen's Steakhouse and treated myself to a martini, and I don't think it was more than like $16. And like that was treating myself, And like I feel like I've seen more than that in Chicago at places. But yeah, I might want to cut that out. I don't know if I want to admit that I just paid $16 for a drink. I was treating myself. But yeah, and also like with things being cheap, like it's one thing when you look at old photos of Chicago, like I love looking through old menus of stuff and just also like street photography from back then. But seeing stuff like sandwiches, 5 cents, like the Berghoff is this very long running restaurant in Chicago. And on their website, they talk about how beers were 5 cents and they came with a sandwich. And so like in 1911, like 5 cents would be equivalent to $2 today. So it'd be $2 for a beer and a sandwich. Like that's just, I know we've talked about, I think on this show of like how much more people used to spend on like clothes as a percentage of their budget. Yeah. And I know food has fluctuated over time, but yeah, that would be so, I would love that deal. I would love the $2.
But you know what I also found though, as I was reading for this week, I found an account that said that those restaurants on West Madison Street that served hobos smelled.
Smell.
Can you imagine walking to a restaurant and it smelling bad?
Yeah.
Like you could smell it from the outside. That was what it smelled like. It grossed me out so much.
Yeah, man. It's just one of those things like non-negotiable as a restaurant. Like you can't be like decor can be bad, but smells cannot be.
Yeah, it's like you step in and it smells like rotting food.
I've been in I remember walking to a restaurant and there's like, oh, we're closed. We had like a toilet backup, and you think about it, it's like that doesn't affect the kitchen. That doesn't affect like any of these things. Like, no, it smells like shit in here. No one's going to want to eat. Like, yeah.
So yeah, the cheap food was nice and everything, but yeah, on West Madison Street, there were also like, you could get like, this is interesting. You could get like cheap or like free haircuts as a hobo because there were 4 barber schools.
Oh, nice.
Because like the people who were learning how to cut hair, like that was an audience that would not be picky.
Yeah.
So they could just test it out.
No.
Yeah.
In college, I thought about getting my hair cut at a like place like that in Chicago. Yeah, I don't know.
I had it done before when I was younger.
Yeah. You can get dental work done that way by people in training as well.
Yeah.
I had a dermatology procedure done recently. I had to get these 2 like skin things removed, and one was done by like a real full-fledged doctor, and the other one was done by a resident. The resident did not do as good on his one, I gotta say. I understand that they're learning, but like I felt a little like I feel like they should have charged me less, is what I'd say. Like 1.5 times the rate, like just because it's just a junior one, like we bill our like, our carpenters differently. Like we should be the same with doctors.
Yeah. I've had a bad experience like that before with like, it was getting my blood drawn or a vaccine or something, but they didn't know what they were doing. Oh, and they like had to like, no,
multiple
it was getting
times.
my blood drawn. It was like, they had to like
it's a bigger needle,
poke my skin 2 or 3 times and they were like completely effed it up.
So another Chicago location is Bughouse Square, which is Washington Park. And so that's in the very nice, like, that's kind of in the border between River North and Gold Coast.
Yeah.
I'd say. I had a restaurant project that I did over there in that area. It's very nice. Like nowadays, Washington Park is exclusively people walking golden doodles, I would say, almost without failure.
Yeah.
Maybe like Bichon Frise tossed in there or something. But yeah, it's just very nice dogs and well-heeled people.
And for listeners who know the Newberry Library, that's the park across the street.
Oh, yeah.
So that's where that is.
Yeah.
But yeah, Bughouse Square was the nickname given to Washington Square Park after it became a popular place for hobo intellectuals. So soapbox orators would speak about religion, politics, economic struggle, and like it was sort of similar to Hobo Jungles in that way, where like there was this like freedom to talk about different ideas. Like you could talk about like, you could say you were like for free love or against free love, and there were always people listening and like kind of debating back at you from the audience.
Yeah, and so the name itself, Bughouse, like refers to like an insane asylum or a treatment center or something. And I guess there were a lot of those in that area at the time. But yeah, and so it was just a proximity kind of thing. It's just very interesting because it's such a desirable neighborhood nowadays. This construction project just finished up of Lawson House, which was like a single room occupancy, a place that people call hobo hotels, actually, is a common term for that. But these are like very small room places, often with the communal bath or kitchens. Yeah. And so it got renovated, and now it's they reduced the total unit count, but now everyone has a bathroom and a kitchen, basically, and they're being very protective about like it still staying affordable and rehousing residents and stuff. So not to call it like it's not a bug house in any way, but there is still like affordable housing for people in that area.
That's good.
Yeah.
Oh, there's a cat over here.
Yeah, we've got a guest.
You need to stop doing that, cat.
Yeah.
I wanted to meow though. I haven't actually.
Yeah, I was. If Mitzi can actually meow on the podcast, then we'll give her, final edit privileges and all that.
And then another thing on Chicago hobo history. So as you mentioned, one of the most important figures in hobo culture was Ben Reitman, who was a Chicago native. And so I read part of a book for this week, the Damnedest Radical by Roger Bruns. And so he's one of my all-time favorite historical figures, although reading this book actually
soured you on him a little bit.
I kind of feel like he might be the type of guy to annoy me, TBH. Like, very irresponsible, honestly. Yeah.
I think that he was a lot more high-minded maybe than a lot of people actually in it, you know? And that always kind of annoys me a bit when there's one person who's like, I don't know, very into the intellectual side of it. And there's people who come to that same kind of end result, but out of their living conditions, you know? He was like a hobo nerd is how I'd describe it.
I mean, I got the details on his life story. So basically, his father abandoned him and his brother. His mom had to raise him. And then starting at the age of 12, he started to take like train trips. And then because he was from Chicago, when he started to actually be like a proper hobo, hobos came back to Chicago all the time. That was their mecca. And so he always had like more roots in the city, and he had this like very important connection to his mother. And he ended up taking a job, like a temporary job, part-time, as all hobos do, where it was with a medical laboratory or something like that. But they could tell he was really smart, and they told him to become a doctor. And he did med school and became an actual physician. And he had an actual medical practice somewhere along like 43rd Street, 41st Street. He had like an actual office. So he would usually work there like temporarily, usually in the winter. And then the rest of the year, he would like randomly get urges to travel all over the country or even internationally. And then he'd come back. But he was always like getting involved with like really big ideas on how to like better hobos. Like he would do like these stunts where he'd have like these lavish dinners for hobos to like, and invite the press and like have them interview them. He also, again, founded the Hobo College. He did so much for them.
At the Hobo College, they even had like a hobo debate team, debate U Chicago debaters, and then the hobos won. And this just seems like it was so like fed to the media basically to report on this, because like people love stories like this. Like I think America respects folk wisdom much more than it respects like actual like academic stuff, or that seems to be the story that we like tell ourselves over time. But yeah, so like people want to hear that, like, oh, some plucky hobos beat these like stuck up U Chicago kids.
Yeah, because if you think about it, one of their main things to just do, because there wasn't that much to do when you're on the road, was talk to people. Like they would have good oratory skills.
Yeah.
So
they had to entertain themselves.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then so that's in Chicago, and then in the rest of the country, like places were pretty dictated by like their industries, basically like what they could do labor wise for hobos, and also climate too. Like hobos did have a general kind of like nomadic thing. I think it's interesting because like, I don't know, whenever I'm in like the thick of winter in Chicago, I'm just like, man, how did Native Americans live here? And the answer is like, no, they were nomadic. They would go south during this period. And I would always think this in Las Vegas as well. I'm like, man, why would people ever settle here? And the reason was like there was a natural spring of fresh water in Las Vegas before it was dried up by settlers. But like this kind of natural movement throughout America, because our climate is kind of so crazy, like it feels like hobos were retracing what Native Americans did for centuries and millennia.
I mean, one of the benefits of Chicago's climate and just like having 4 seasons is that the winter kills off insects, and that prevents the spread of like vectorial diseases. So like malaria used to be endemic to the United States. It no longer is because of swamp drainage programs that the federal government like worked on. But, you know, that used to be like a factor. Like the South was less appealing because like you could get malaria or like hookworm or things like that.
Yeah, we don't think of like infrastructure as being stuff like vaccinations against malaria that allows us to like, that's as useful as a road when it comes to conquering areas like Florida.
Yeah. But yeah, on the other regions of the country, so hobos were very prominent and very like numerous in the Midwest and the West, because there were the type of jobs that they could take with like farming, mining, basically the frontier, quote unquote, of the country. There was frontier work to do. The South was less appealing because like they had really strict vagrancy laws that could land a hobo in jail for years arbitrarily. And so they tried to avoid the South, although some would try to go there for the winter when it was warmer. And then the East, like there were some, but like they're also, that was where the majority of people were in this time period in the Northeast. And like they had a surplus of labor already. Like there wasn't that much migratory work to be found there.
Yeah. You had mentioned earlier that like they would let hobos ride for free to go out west.
Yeah.
But then like California would get like overburdened with hobos, like I think maybe after that season or something. And so I read this thing about like California state troopers like preventing entry to hobos from, or like just preventing anyone from entering California, which is like illegal basically. I guess we can kind of hint at the next week's episode. We're going to talk about Civil War and that kind of stuff. But,
we're going to watch the movie together.
Yeah. But yeah, it's just like, it's crazy, like just how casually sometimes states will just like violate constitutional things when something else becomes like mildly inconvenient. But yeah, just state troopers like just violating the Constitution and like trying to like, are you a hobo? Then you're not allowed into this state of this country that you are clearly a citizen of.
Yeah. I mean, hobo life, like hobos, there being 3 million of them. Cities, states, they would oftentimes enact laws that were pretty brutal to them. Like there was this actually, it only happened once, but like there was this incident where 4 hobos were literally sold off. But yeah, in general though, their lives were like really dangerous and they weren't treated well. I would say it was worse. They were treated much worse by the railroads, like with railroad police, like they were worse than actual police.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, yeah, that's just like, you just think about the role of like a railroad police officer. Like that's not going to attract the kind of like person who wants to protect their community. It's just someone who wants to protect, like, they're like kind of a mercenary cop in a way. They're just protecting the private property of a large corporation. Like, I don't know. I'm sure that's going to attract. And you're out there like unsupervised basically too. You're not like on a city street where there's like onlookers. You're just like in a rail yard in the middle of nowhere. Like you can do whatever you want to that hobo. It's just like, I don't know. Yeah, it was obviously like a rough time. And then just like interacting with freight trains, which are like, you think about all the passenger safeguards involved in passenger rail, you know, of that there's an elevated platform, that there's a door that you step onto and you have to wait for the train to come to a stop. And you have hobos, like what they would do is the trains go slow as they enter or leave a station. And it's not that slow. It's still like just a little bit slower than like full running speed. So they'd have to like catch these moving trains. Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, some of the things the railroad police would do is like if they caught a hobo, they'd throw them off the moving train, which when I first read about that, I thought that would be like immediate death. But then I actually read an account where someone was thrown off and lived. So it wasn't always death, but they would also just shoot them point blank and they die.
Yeah, they had like no oversight. They could just do whatever. Yeah.
Another thing they did, and this like really freaked me out when I read it, is like there would oftentimes be hobos traveling underneath the train cars. They would travel like on top, you know, inside pretty much every part of the train. They could find a place to hide. But underneath, they would do this thing, the railroad police, where like they'd throw like an iron rod attached to a string underneath the train, and it would hit all the hobos underneath and like instant death. Like, yeah.
No, there was one thing like hobos would sometimes stay in like refrigerator cars, but then like the railroad bulls, as they were called, the security ones, would like lock them in there. And it's like, do we have evidence of that? Like, did this really happen? It's like, that's terrifying. That's like, it's so scary.
Yeah, because the refrigerated cars could be nice if it was hot, but then like you ran the risk of them getting closed and you freezing to death.
So yeah, like in terms of the visual element of the hobo, like what we picture, it's, I don't know. I looked up like Norman Rockwell illustrations of hobos. He has 2 really good ones. But I think the hobo has become like a kind of beloved cultural figure in a sense, like if it's kept back in time far enough, you know, because of course people generally just kind of hate homeless people nowadays, but like if it's far enough back, like we see a homeless person in like a ragged t-shirt or something, but you see a hobo and he's wearing like a frumpy suit and it's like, oh, he's from the olden times. This is actually cute. And like, what's it? The Tramp, the classic movie by Charlie Chaplin. Yeah. But yeah, and so he played a character that was like, you know, a guy trying to avoid work and just getting into scrapes and stuff. Yeah. So yeah, the bindle is the most like classic hobo accessory, which is the like knapsack tied around a stick, held on your shoulder. That can't be like an efficient. This is like the worst way to carry things. I don't know how comfortable it could be.
The bindles, prior to this week, I assumed that the fabric hanging from the end of the stick was just fabric, but actually it was usually like a shirt or like a piece of clothing. So even that was like functional. I mean, fabric was expensive back then.
Yeah.
But yeah, bindles were like more popular in the earlier period with hobos, and then people mostly didn't use them after a while.
Yeah, I would think you'd need like to carry a lot of stuff, if you're trying to be like any amount of self-sufficient. But that's kind of the thing with hobos. Like they weren't like fully self-sufficient mountain men, like living in the wilderness. Like the fact that the hobo jungle was always like just outside of town.
Yeah.
Where you could like have money, buy goods and services, that kind of thing. Like they were involved and not involved with more structured society.
Yeah.
Basically on their own terms as best they could.
I didn't get into it, but there is overlap between hobos and cowboys and hobos and lumberjacks.
Yeah, that was mentioned. There was some quote from the book I should have written down about that. But like, yeah, that cowboys get to be much more beloved, even though they are like traveling workers.
Yeah,
basically. But they sit around campfires, they sing songs, they tell stories. Like there is a lot going on there.
But cowboy work and lumberjack work, both like those jobs, hobos could do them part-time.
Yeah.
So there could be like hobo cowboy fusions.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I feel like that's in the cowboy archetypes, that you'll see in a cowboy movie. There will be like the old hobo kind of thing.
You're right,
Maybe imagining this. There'll be someone who's like a little rougher around the edges, probably an alcoholic or something. So there's some overlap there.
One thing that was usually carried in the bindles was razors. And so the razors you mentioned, like, it was very important for hobos to keep clean shaven. But if they didn't have a razor, they would actually, this is crazy, they would just use a piece of broken glass.
Yeah, I saw that. I'm just like, I mean, the book that we're basing a lot of this off, that really good book, like it's got a full bibliography in back. Like this guy's got to be getting stuff from somewhere. But I was just like, really? Like it's the best thing? Just carrying a piece of glass. And then they'd have to carry their tools if they like actually kind of knew a trade. Yeah. And so like this kind of reminds me actually of like Jews, of how like we would travel more so than like other people. Like, yes, there were Jewish farmers like back in Europe, but like we would often take up trades like tailoring that you could easily take with you, or jewelry as well. And hobos lean towards those trades as well too.
Yeah. Yeah. I read this tidbit from like Hobos Wandering America, where someone who worked in mines would have to carry all these like pickaxes and a sledgehammer, and they've described all the weights. And
it was insane. It was like 200 pounds. Like it was like 90-pound pick and all that. It's
I wouldn't be able to go like 25 feet without taking a rest or something.
Maybe it's just like a tall tale, where the pickaxe gets heavier each time he tells it.
But like literally every hobo did have at least one trade that they associated themselves with. I read this this third book, Hobo, or like it was just titled Hobos and Homelessness by Niels Anderson. And in that one, it was a sociological study. He was like interviewing hobos to find out things about them. And he did this, he mentioned this survey with 400 hobos, and like they all listed out all their trades. And some of them were like sailors, like some of them were like cigar makers. Like every hobo had at least one thing they felt like they were best at.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I was thinking about like hobo appearance and fashion and stuff, because on NymFed Alumni they were talking about that most recent Margiela show that was very like Victorian and over the top, and there was like some parts of it that were very like disheveled, but it was in that way where it's like referencing such an older period of like being poor that it's like it's politically fine, it's not, because people always get very sensitive when you like appropriate like symbols of the downtrodden and of like lower classes, and you do it in a high fashion way. It does look pretty rough, I would say, but if you do it in the Victorian era, like it's fine. Like street urchins are fair game. That's not what poverty and suffering looks like
Oliver Twistcore.
What?
Oliver Twistcore.
Yeah, exactly. It's like it's just like it's far enough that it's essentially a fairy tale. It's like it's not medieval far away, but like as we get further and further from that period, no one's gonna be like, "Hey, my grandpa was a street urchin and he did clean chimneys, and this is offensive to us." Like, no one's gonna say that. And also, what was it? I think this was maybe on Red Scare, but they were talking about the John Galliano documentary, and one of his like fashion shows was inspired by the homeless, and people did get mad about it then because he maybe like appropriated too closely to it. But people were defending him of just like that the style of homeless he was mimicking was kind of the early 1900s, like, you know, like a frumpy tie or something. And I haven't seen a homeless person wear a tie in forever. So that's also, I would sort that under fair game and not get too offended. But,
yeah. No, the fashion industry, like they in their own way, they just see the same thing too much. And they just like anything that's like novel, they're like, we need to do that, because like they so rarely see anything that inspires them. So once they do, they like can't get over it for at least like a season, and then they make a collection.
In the Electroclash episode, I think I'd mentioned how like parts of the aesthetics remind me of the movie Zoolander, which was you know, a send up of early 2000s like fashion design, and it all culminates in the Derelict show, which takes inspiration from hobos and stuff. It's like something that the fashion industry just can't shake. It's like some primal need to like go back to homeless people and do it better than a previous designer.
Yeah. And then on hobo culture, as we mentioned, hobo symbols are kind of fake. But there is this nice flashback in Mad Men.
Yeah, I will always bring up Mad Men. But yeah, it's I like these scenes in the show. Like, of course, everyone remembers the show for like it taking place in the 1950s, everyone thinks, but it's actually fully in the 60s. I think maybe the last season hops into the early 70s. But yeah, so if you're, you know, 40, 50 years old in the 60s, and that means you were like, you know, conscious during the 30s, during this period of hobos as well.
And I've only seen 10 episodes of Mad Men from the first season. So that was one of the episodes I did get to see. But yeah, they depict the main character, like growing up, and he's in poverty.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so this like hobo like draws some symbols on their post that shows that like, oh, like you leave warnings for other hobos was the idea.
I think he scratched in the purported hobo symbol for a bad man to say that the man who raised the protagonist of Mad Men was a bad guy.
Yeah, it was. I don't know. I want to believe in those, but I think from what I can tell, the most common type of like hobo symbol would just be you writing your name and your direction and the time, that kind of thing, or like your hobo name kind of deal. But yeah. And then I think we wrote too much down about this, but I mean, if you're gonna have a whole bunch of guys like around a campfire, like people are gonna start singing songs, especially like in the era before recorded music, like everyone had a much higher general level of musical ability, you know, because it was a way to entertain yourself. Like you kind of had to be your own music recording. And so hobo songs would like make their way into like the American songbook generally. And so I think that like, I think this is a common thing in culture broadly, but like a group that is like despised or looked down upon, like once they generate an exportable piece of culture that is more widely acceptable, then like the culture will take that and then not extend any niceties to the original group that it came from, basically. And so you'll get like not classical singers, but like popular singers in the 1920s and 30s doing renditions of like hobo songs. I think there's like Pete Seeger would always do this song like Good Night Little Hobo or something. And then the song Rock Candy Mountain is probably the most famous hobo song, I'd say, which is a song about just like an ideal world for a hobo, like a hobo heaven he gets to go to in the end.
And that song, I listened to it today, and it makes so much more sense now that like I know so much about hobos, like just them being like, oh yes, and all the boxcars are empty.
Yeah, like, it's like all these like nice wins basically for a hobo.
And they said something about like how there's endless hay or something. It's like that was like a preferred material for hobos to sleep on, that or newspapers. Yeah. If you slept on newspapers though, you were classy.
Yeah,
you had real money.
Yeah, I forget what they called those ones. There was a profesh.
Oh,
a profesh was like actually a tramp, I think. Yeah, it was a tramp who like dressed nice, was a little bit of a dandy. But yeah, they would be on newspapers. That's nice stuff.
I can't imagine like living in a world so destitute that like sleeping on newspapers is a privilege. But yeah, the songs that hobos sung were like very like creative with all the slang that they used.
It like integrated that together, like the kind of the speaking like hobo linguistics.
Oh, but yeah, did you ever hear that like Fran Lebowitz quote about how like culture is so evenly dispersed across like people in time? Have you ever heard that one?
No.
She says like talent is like specks of sand. It's like it occurs everywhere. So even within hobo culture, because there's 3 million hobos,
You're
like,
gonna have a crazy.
there's gonna be
hobo.
like a handful that are like extremely exceptional, like songwriters or just talented people.
Yeah, and there's in that situation where they're a hobo.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then the hobo ethical code. Yeah, that's just something that like pops up, and then we'll get to like modern hobos as well. But that's, I think, one of the things that we really like to remember about hobos as a culture is that like I think it's a way that we differentiate like modern homeless people from hobos. Is that like, oh man, back in the good old days they had a code that they would stick to.
Yeah, the hobo ethical code is a set of a couple, like 1 or 2 dozen rules, and these were written down. It was like not something that like was like intangible or like super flexible. It's like, no, this is rule 2, this is rule 3. And like it would encourage hobos to like treat each other better and like follow by the rules of society. And who knows where it came from, but like, yeah.
So I found like one of the written down codes that like you can find was put down by a hobo union. So this was a thing, like the union movement of the late 1800s, like wrapped up hobos as well.
The
as
IWW, right?
Yeah. The I won't work, as my grandpa would always call it.
He called him that?
Yeah, but he's very pro union and pro all that. But I guess he's saying what someone would say about that. But yes, because this, I mean, again, there's such a sizable like portion of the working world that like Eugene V. Debs and the labor movement like really spoke to hobos and tried to get them involved. But it's also difficult because they were so like itinerant and moving. They're harder to unionize than a factory worker who like owns a house in town.
Yeah, but some of the jungles would be like, we are a Wobblies, which was a nickname for members of the IWW. Like, we are a Wobblies jungle. You can't stay here unless you join.
Yeah.
So yeah, there were like ways they try to force or encourage each other to join the IWW.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then there's also like a hobo court. That's one thing they mentioned that I'm also skeptical of. I don't know, not to come off as a complete like skeptic, but some of these things just sound like too fun to be true.
Yeah.
A hobo court, like where you imagine like, that like your charge is like stealing a can of beans, and then a whole bunch of like disheveled hobos are like sitting on a log and they form your jury. Like it's just too perfect.
Actually, in Hobos and Homelessness, I read an account written by the author where he described an incident in which there was a hobo court. So what had happened was some hobos staying in a jungle. It was nighttime. One hobo stole or tried to steal possessions from another hobo, which was the greatest sin. That was a big deal, because to steal something from someone who practically has nothing is like the greatest sin. And so there was all this commotion, everyone got woken up, and then there was immediately like, okay, we need to form a court. And so like the most elderly hobo was like put in charge, but then there were like other people on a panel of sorts. And so they started to debate with each other and with everyone in the camp about like what his punishment should be. And the punishment they initially settled on was like someone needed to give him lashes on his back, but no one volunteered to do it. Would have made them look bad, I guess. But then they needed to like renegotiate what the punishment would be, because that didn't work. And so what they came up with was like another hobo who didn't like the hobo who was caught stealing was like, I don't like him. I've met him before. He's a bad guy. Like, I want to fight him. And so then they had a fist fight, and the guy who wasn't caught stealing was the victor. He like totally beat the other guy up.
Nice.
And so then I think they took money from him as part of like, you did wrong. And then they were like, you got to leave. If you're caught again, we're going to kill you. And that's how the courts would work.
Oh my God. It's on the like stealing from someone who has nothing. Like I kind of do like these bits of law where they like, you have to rank crimes, of course. But I've always liked in law when there's protections for like, not protections, but when you commit a crime that preys on people's good intentions, you should be like punished doubly so. And that feels very biblical and just and correct to me. I don't know why that is. Like if you, what was it like? I was trying to think of the serial killer this is, but I'm only thinking of Buffalo Bill, because he does this in the movie. But he's like, oh, I'm injured. Can you help me get something into my car? like that thing, like preying on someone, be like, oh, I should help an injured person. Like you should instantly just get to like 12 times whatever the normal thing is. Cause like then you get people being afraid to help basically. And that's like, oh, I think that's a big like sliding, like slippery slope of like, I don't know, you can't like, do not let good Samaritans be punished, I think is my take on that.
Yeah.
But yeah. What can I say? We are always drawn to a strong ethical code on this podcast. We've talked about.
We're also always drawn to stories of situational homosexuality. So that's the next section.
That is the next section. And now for this perfect segue into gay hobos.
Yeah. I'll take the lead on this. If
Please
you
do.
Want.
Please do.
Because this section was my idea, of course. Okay. So homos were oftentimes like in these situations or like in hobo jungles where it was pretty much exclusively men, and that like prisons or like other all male environments would lead to like a higher incidence of homosexuality. But this was an important thing in the time because like not only was there just a higher incidence than like what's technically, the statistical average, but it's like it was also one of the few places where you could be relatively open about it. And like news accounts at the time, and also even the books we were reading would like, I think it was like partially honest, partially all the books we read were like written in the 80s or 90s, but like homosexuality within hobo culture was painted as being like predatory to a degree. Like young boys would be like exploited because the majority of hobos leaned younger. They were young men. Yeah, there weren't as many like seasoned hobos as there were young ones. But yeah, I find it fascinating.
Yeah, no. You had in here that like hobos were maybe the first to use the word gay to refer to like homosexuality.
Yeah, there was this word, this hobo slang word, gay cat, which meant like an inexperienced hobo. But yeah, actually, even like Merriam-Webster's dictionary says that is the origin, is like hobo culture. So yeah.
I don't know. It's interesting. Yeah, so many of the books we did read were from like the 80s and 90s. I actually thought they were very fair. I'm surprised they even talked about like homosexuality in that period. I mean, I should give the 80s and 90s more credit.
The book Hobos and Homelessness, I think that was written a bit earlier. That one was written by an actual hobo who had become a sociologist at U Chicago. Yeah, I do think though that like it was almost like you couldn't ignore it. Like it was going on in like every hobo jungle. But there was this estimate that I found while reading books for the week where someone had estimated about like 10% of hobos were engaging in homosexual behavior, which that seems believable to me because like the gay population in the US is much lower than people think. It's like 2 to 3%. Yeah. And if you double or triple that to me seems reasonable. But yeah, I as like just an aside in the docket for this week, I went on this rant about how like like straight people or just Americans in general like completely overestimate the gay population. Like Pew Research Center consistently finds that Americans think that like 25% of Americans are gay.
Yeah,
like no, it's like 2%.
It's like, do people remember high school? It feels like it was 2 to 3%. Like I went to my class was like 214 people, and it felt like we had like I don't know, a couple gay people.
I mean, my high school, since I finished high school, I've learned that like 20 to 25 of the guys I was in high school with out of like 100 guys were gay or bi, and that's like 25%. But
but that's a lot of confounding factors there. I think of just as we talked about the best little boy in the world kind of theory of like it's a very high achieving school. It's going to self sort to a certain type of guy as well.
But no, me in my day-to-day life, I do not encounter other gay people like as friends or coworkers. Like I mean, partly it's just because I've never really gotten along with other gay guys for a lot of different reasons.
Me and Jewish people, man, I feel you. I always say I want more Jewish friends, but I think it's happening. I think I'm making more Jewish friends.
I don't know. There are the Shabbat dinners we've been going to.
No. But yeah, I mean, I live in Boys Town. I'm on a gay rugby team. Yeah, I meet tons of gay people all the time. In construction, it felt like no, not a lot of people. But now that I'm in like construction that also designs, like then you're in the whole design world as well and doing like I don't know, then it's pretty gay.
Yeah, I work in a pretty gay environment too, but It's also like an overwhelmingly female environment. I'm the only guy that works at my library currently. Even the security guards and janitors are women too.
What are straight male librarians like?
Annoying. Yeah, they're like they usually there's just one guy who's really popping into my head because he's this guy who works for the library who's like really into labor organizing, but like honestly, like I love unions. I do think higher union density would be better for America, but like the DSA union enthusiast is not I don't like them.
It's union. It's like, it's playing pretend. It always like annoys me like that. Like we had, of course, this case in Chicago of this like beloved longtime queer bar that like collapsed under the weight of its workers all trying to unionize against their like cancer-stricken business owner. And they all wanted to get like full health benefits for working 10 hours a week and stuff. Everyone wants to trade in the aesthetics of being a union member, but like, listen, you're not down there in the coal mines. Like you're not like doing it. Like it's like the origins of organized labor has always been in physical labor because that's where the most important gains are made, which is in safety, basically. And then you get things like work-life balance and all of that. But yeah, everyone wants to see themselves as like a plucky union organizer.
Yeah. For me, I've always had this like, I've always been very grateful for just anything an employer has given me. I'm just grateful for the life I've had.
100%. Yeah. When I tell people like what I've endured at work, they're like, why? I'm just like, I just can't believe I have a job. Like it's so, I don't know where I got this. I think it might be a familial thing. I was told by my grandma that like the men in our family have like a martyr complex towards their employers that will like, drop everything and help them out.
Yeah. I've never had a job I didn't like. I've always like cared about my employers. And I want them to pay me well, I guess, but like I also want them to do well.
Yeah, I've always done like 2 weeks notices before leaving a job. Like I've always just like I was saying like we allocate our expenses and stuff, at work. Like I have a company card and I have a personal card. And like if I'm at Home Depot and I'm buying materials and I want a bag of Takis, like I will do one transaction on the company card and like one transaction on the personal card. And like our carpenters and stuff like will not do that. They'll like always add stuff. And I'm like, come on, guys, you gotta like really be strict to this. But I don't know why.
Also, have I ever told you about when I worked for the Museum of Contemporary Art and they got into like union organizing and how cringe it was?
No.
Yeah. It was pretty bad. It was like the museum treated us well during the pandemic. Like they didn't lay all of us off like some other major national museums did. But they kept paying us from home for like 2 months or 2.5 months. And
amazing.
Yeah, there's this part of the pandemic where like I was getting paid for 80 hours of work a week because the library and the museum was paying for me. And then I got another job as a essential worker just because I wanted to help. And I was getting paid like so much. And then we all started working at the museum and people like the day of after they'd paid us for like 2.5 months, they showed up and they were like, I'm quitting now. I was like, you guys are so bogus.
Yeah, no. During COVID, I got laid off and I didn't take any unemployment. I was doing the online process. And then I got kind of like the website crashed a few times on me. And I was like, you know what? I'm going to take this setback actually as an intentional thing. And I'm not going to take any government money because then I can like say that when I get on the other side of this. Kind of wish I took the money. Honestly, it wouldn't hurt. I could put that in retirement and stuff like that. But I guess I have my scruples.
Yeah. There are limits though. I actually don't know this for Illinois specifically, but a lot of states, they have limits where like you can be on unemployment for 2 years, your entire life, and that's it.
Oh, yeah. So you can like run up the clock on that. Yeah.
Yeah. You don't want to run out when you don't need to.
Yeah.
It's better to wait probably. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But I would doubt if Illinois is one of those states. To get back on topic. Okay. So I've been reading this book, The Dawn of Everything by David Graeber. Have you heard about it, Joseph?
Yes. I want to read it as well, but I don't know, I got other books.
Yeah. I'm actually going to I have a book club. It's the first book we're doing. And so I just read this recently. It's over 500 pages, which for me as someone with visual snow syndrome is like a big task. It took me a while, but it was like a good endeavor because like it completely changed my perspective on like human prehistory. So David Graeber is an anthropologist. He wrote this book in conjunction with an archaeologist, and they together like pieced all of these studies and findings from both fields that have not been assembled together to like repaint what human life was like prior to like agriculture and prior to written history. And one of the things that he brings up in the book is that there are three sort of basic social freedoms that were common for people prior to the inventions of government and economies and things like that. And these were the freedom to escape one's surroundings and move away, the freedom to disobey arbitrary authority, and the freedom to reimagine and reconstruct one's society in a different form. And so I think that hobos had both the first and the third freedom. So the freedom to move and the freedom to reimagine and reconstruct one's society. And these are freedoms that are not common, you know, since the inception of like nation states and like governments that
the kind of formalizing of life. Yeah, basically.
Yeah.
I didn't really think of, the timeline of the hobo really makes sense, that he's like, to go back to the first episode, like the flaneur, like it's something that's only really possible after we start to kind of demarcate life a little bit more, which I think is what happened in the modern era.
Yeah.
That like we kind of like hardened up what civilization is and what's permitted inside it.
Yeah, because now in the present day, it's really uncommon for people to move long distances. Most people die within like 25 or 50 miles of where they were born.
That is so crazy to me, because that just doesn't feel like, I mean, when you're just a young professional in a large city, like no one's from, like it feels like everyone's a transplant from somewhere else and they're on their way to somewhere else. Like, but no, that's just not indicative of the rest of the country and how people live their lives.
Yeah. But that's just because transplants mostly know transplants.
Yeah.
I mean, every time I meet someone who's not from here, they're like, oh, wow, I don't meet people who grew up here. It's like, there are literally like a million kids right now getting raised in Chicago.
Yeah.
Like,
where are they going to go? Like a lot of them are going to stay here. Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, in the book, they mention how like when they find burials, they oftentimes can tell from the burials that the people who existed 10,000 years ago, they were buried like hundreds of miles from where they were born most of the time. They had like a much higher like genetic diversity than what you'd expect. Yeah. And so like there was this freedom of movement that's very clear from the archaeological record that's just really not present today. But hobos got to have that through trains.
Yeah. Yeah, just like the genetic diversity thing reminds me of how like Native American tribes in like after wars would just absorb like other tribes basically.
Yeah.
I was kind of thinking of this when we were talking about like how kids were actually a benefit. And there was that practice of like stealing kids after you conquered someone. Yeah. And also like in Game of Thrones, how there was the wards, you know, like someone would be a ward of someone else. I'm like, why would you just raise someone's kid for them? It seemed like, cause you beat them. That doesn't make sense, but it's like you're taking away one like slot from their family basically, of like having a son is such an asset. You can marry him like for power and all that. Yeah. Unless you have too many sons, then that becomes a problem as well in primogeniture. But
yeah, in the dawn of everything, one of the interesting points he brings up is that monarchy is one of the only political systems where children are valued. You know, a baby or a small child is, in the scope of things, as important as the king, because blood is blood. Mm-hmm. And so that's like one of the only good things about monarchy.
Yeah. Like, is that kids are not seen as expendable.
Yeah.
Or just
they're
like
valuable.
a source of labor. Yeah.
Yeah. But on that topic of freedom, you posed this question about wandering, but I want to get your take first. So do you ever get an urge to wander?
I think I fantasize about like complete freedom and wandering. I got into like tiny houses, like right at the start of it. I thought those are so cool, especially the ones on wheels.
Yeah.
But I don't know. There was a bit where I was researching motorcycles for a bit. I thought it'd be fun to have a little Honda Trail 125. That's just a 125cc motorcycle, which is very weak, very underpowered. It can get up to like 50 miles an hour on a stretch. But my idea would be like I'd pack it up with camping supplies and I'd just, you know, go out into the countryside or something. I don't know. I've done these road trips between Chicago and the West Coast, and usually it was with friends, and we'd stay at KOA campgrounds, which is nice. There's with a military discount. At one time I stayed at one for $7. Wow. For a night, which was so nice. And that kind of feels like a hobo jungle. And then one time I had to drive back from Las Vegas to Chicago solo. And so this was me being a rubber tire hobo, I guess, as they call car hobos. But yeah, it was just my mom's bright red Beetle, Volkswagen Beetle. And I had a tent in my car, and I would set that up like at campgrounds on my way back. So yeah, I've been thinking about getting rid of my car, but one of the things that like stops me is like, well, if you have your car, you can just do that. You can't just drive out to a campground somewhere. It's a lot harder if you don't have that.
So you fantasize about road travel more than air travel or train travel?
Well, train travel just has this time that I like, you look at like how long it takes.
Yeah.
And it's just like, no, I have a job. I can't just like be on a train for 4 days to go like not that far. But I mean, air travel, that, I don't know, taking a cheap flight across the world and just like resetting up my life there, knowing that I don't know anyone for like 300 miles around me. I thought like 500 miles around me would be really interesting. But I'm also like, I don't know, I don't travel a lot or really at all because I feel bad when I take time off of work. And so I kind of like treat as though I'm always like act like I'm a tourist in Chicago all the time, kind of with the amount I spend on restaurants, I would say. But I don't know. I just think that you can really squeeze a lot out of the place you already are,
I mean, this city's big. There's like 20,000 blocks. It's like, do you know how there's that feature on like Google Photos and Apple Photos where like you can see a map of every place you've taken a picture in Chicago?
I love that.
Mine is like obviously very dense, but like Southside, honestly, have not seen even half of it.
Yeah.
So,
How about you? Get the urge to, hop a freight train and travel?
No, I just listed a bunch of hot takes mostly. So yeah, for me, I really like the patterns of my everyday life. And I think that like that kind of shows in who my favorite author is. My favorite author is Banana Yoshimoto, who writes all these books about exhausted Japanese women in the 1990s who have like part-time jobs or like figuring out their marriage, or they're very quotidian. Like they're just all about like enjoying the domestic sphere. And I feel like I kind of enjoy those things too, like walking, taking the train, working out, cooking, reading and working, work being fun for me because I've never had a job that I didn't like. And I do get like urges to travel. I've had urges recently to go to New York, but I think that I need to not do it that much because doing it too much makes you not enjoy it. Like every time I'm on a plane, I feel like it's a privilege.
Oh yeah.
And I feel very special. But if I was doing that every month, it would like start to seem like commonplace.
Yeah.
And I'm very critical of people who make travel their identity because there's this phrase my sister once used about an ex-boyfriend that I think is very, very apt. It's she called him like a photographer. She called him a tourist of life.
That's a good dig. Yeah, just visiting, not really experiencing.
Because he was a photographer, and so he'd just like walk around snapping pics and be like, "Oh, that's nice." No, you need to be like rooted in a place, and you need to like cultivate long-term bonds, and like that's what gives you an actual understanding of the human condition. You like going to like random countries and looking at strangers, like that doesn't help you understand their minds or their perspectives. You need to like have like deep hangouts where you get to know a person.
I always have that thought when I'm bored and I scroll around on like Google Earth and I just look at random places, and it's like, man, I will never know what it's like to grow up in Kyrgyzstan. Like all the inside jokes, like the shows that they grow up with as kids, and just like all these.
They probably grew up with Doraemon.
Maybe there's some crossover of Doraemon made it over there. What's that like about Doraemon? But just like all that stuff, like I will never be of that culture. There's like all those things, and I'm not a complete like anti-travel person. I will say that like the people I know who travel the most, sometimes there's something missing. I will say, it's like sometimes they have this sense of like this feels like this is what interesting people do, right?
Yeah.
And so if I do that, I'll become interesting. Especially suspicious if they just like, I don't know, travel in a very contained way, as you can tell. But also the opposite is suspicious too. If someone tries to full like Anthony Bourdain it and just like, everything is so authentic. I need the most authentic all the time. That I think is also suspect. You posted the Agnes Collard article where she's just like firmly anti-travel. And my feelings on that article are complicated by my strong dislike of Agnes Collard. She's a philosophy professor and writer at U Chicago. I just find her whole vibe like, I think that for someone who, demonic, but like she became famous for this article where she's like in a polyamorous relationship and she like left her nebbish Jewish husband for her like 10 years, her junior grad student. But of course, when other people do that, it's very like dumb and base. But when she does it, it is very enlightened and it's a philosophical realization of like, all these ideas that she's been writing papers on and all that. It's just so like, I just it's also, I just think there's something uniquely Jewish about it all that's like that does not come across when people write about her. That like her parents like came from super rough backgrounds and like clawed for everything they had just to watch their like daughter prance around and live this like life. She wears these ridiculous outfits too. She wears like extremely bright colors.
You know a lot about her. I did.
Yeah, for someone I don't like, this is a worst habit of mine is when I don't like something, I research it extensively.
Yeah. Do you ever hate watch Ben Shapiro?
No, I actually can't tolerate his cadence for too long. I have to turn it off.
Yeah. I've had phases like that though with conservative figureheads who are kind of annoying. I'll like hate watch them.
You have a crush on Ben Shapiro.
Yeah.
But yeah, what were your thoughts on her takes on that article?
So I did read the article at one point. I didn't read it in advance of this week, but I read it because one of my siblings in the family group chat posted it, and she specifically asked for my take. Okay. I was asked to give my opinion. And so then I posted something like, yeah, I think people who travel too much are vapid. And, you know, to understand the human condition, you need like long-term connections in one place. You know what I said earlier. And then my one sister who goes on all of these like 3-day vacations to like San Diego and Florida and all these Sunbelt places that like seem empty to me. She took it like as a personal affront, and I had to take all this flack, even though I didn't post the article. Some other sibling asked for my opinion. I was not being mean to you. But yeah, she got really
You're really banking on your family never finding the podcast.
I mean, there's so many of them. It's like they have an anonymity, even though I'm telling some stories. But yeah, Agnes Collard, I don't know too much about her, but I'm of the opinion that like, okay, this is from like an Alex Kushida quote from Twitter that I really loved. I'm not on Twitter anymore, but she once said something along the lines about how we shouldn't destigmatize lifestyles that cause the vast majority of people to mess up their lives, because most people are not well balanced. Most people have interpersonal conflict right now. And so making it seem like, you know, leaving your husband for a boyfriend is just like well and dandy and like you can have a good life if you do that. No, most people like will be in financial ruin if they separate from their significant other. Like this is an upper class foray into like this intellectual exercise that she's comfortable doing. But most people, it would ruin their lives. And so like we should not present this as like some fun thing that like everyone can do.
Bring back the idea of forbidden knowledge. You know, that some things should just like, we should just not allow that. You've spoken about that you think that like images should be maybe a little more tightly governed.
Yeah, I'm a free speech absolutist, 100%.
Yeah. But like, images are a different thing because that can really I might be on your side on that. I don't really know exactly where I stand. But yeah, like some images are too powerful and they should be restricted.
Yeah.
I think.
I mean, there's so many things online with death and sex that people should not be destigmatized about. Like we need those images to be regulated to some degree. And yeah, that's a big discussion that we won't get into it.
Yeah. And then so, yeah, we talked about the state of like travel today and like basically it's not really possible to be a hobo anymore. So this is maybe, I think the part I became most interested in over the course of researching this is like, what does the modern hobo look like? And so I watched this Vice documentary you sent me of the death of the American hobo. Some Vice guys who try and hop freight trains with mixed success. They do successfully get on one freight train. I think they get caught like twice. And then another time, like it just took too long. So they had to drive. So it's just difficult is one thing physically. Freight trains have changed a lot. They're a lot more efficient. They're not like loitering too long in the rail yard before heading off, so your window is a lot smaller. But yeah, and then end of the hobo. You want to talk about that kind of?
Yeah, I mean, the modern freight trains, they like, with precision railroading and consolidation of so many railroads, so to the point that there's now only 4 major players, like they run longer trains, and as a consequence, likely they run fewer trains. They also have fewer like hubs. There's, cities like Chicago where like rail is really important, but the smaller towns that maybe used to play a role like don't anymore. And so traveling as a hobo is a bit less convenient than it used to be. Yeah. Also, though, like with precision railroading and these longer trains, rail sidings are what trains use when one needs to pass each other when they're single tracked. Railroads are not always double tracked. They're oftentimes single tracked. And so the rail sidings now are not long enough for these like trains that are like 2,000 feet long. So what they have to do is just they end up waiting for like hours or days in some places. So
never mind. I thought the issue is that they weren't in the yards long enough, but they're in the yards too long before they're done.
Or no, like they can be in the middle of a route. It's not that they're waiting, in the hub. But yeah, it's like if you're on one of these freight trains, it's like, and you stop. I can't imagine like being like, oh man, I'm gonna wait like 15 minutes or 24 hours and not being able to get any communication from the crew because you're on the train illegally. Like stowing away on trains is like, it sucked then in the sense that like the railroad bosses could kill you, but it sucks now in the sense of like, you have no reliable knowledge about like, if this is a convenient route or not.
Yeah, in the Vice thing, like they get caught by railroad cops and the guys are just confused. They're like, what, like hobos? Like with the little knapsack? Like,
they're like, oh, that's so wacky. Like you can go, but if we catch you again.
They're just like a little slap on the wrist kind of thing. And also because the fact they just look like, young Vice guys kind of thing. And it ends in them getting to the annual hobo convention in Britt, Iowa. I talked to one of my rugby teammates about this. He's from a small town in Iowa. Britt is like close by, and they were taught about it in school. It's a big deal for them in Britt. They don't got a lot going on. So the hobo convention is important.
Yeah, it's a modern day thing. It's still going on. And like the documentary pointed out that all the hobos that are going to this annual hobo convention are on the older side. Most of them, like, they call themselves hobos. They can be construed as something else where like, they've maybe hitched rides on a few trains, but like majority of the time they're rubber tire hobos. They have cars. It's not like,
or they hitch rides or they hitchhike. But like, I think that was when the hobo was on its way out, there was like a hitchhiking culture, and then that also kind of died out as well too, and then so it's like having your own car. And then so another like modern subculture that has some hobo overlap, I think maybe it's a case of like convergent evolution kind of where it's a separate cultural origin but it's arrived in a similar spot, is crust punks or gutter punks. And so they're an interesting group. I first like witnessed them in Denver, Colorado on a road trip, actually passing through. And then, you notice them by like their very brown clothes. They're often white people with dreads. They'll have beards sometimes. They always have a dog with them. Their clothes are very tattered, but in like a purposeful way, like not in a way you could naturally tatter, And they often have guitars. They'll like play some music or stuff. But yeah.
They also have cats in public.
Yeah, that's true. Maybe on a little leash or something.
Yeah. But, you can't miss them though, because they're oftentimes like laying on sidewalks, which isn't socially acceptable behavior. Like the hobo,
it's not legally acceptable in a lot of cities too. I learned. It's like illegal to sit on a sidewalk in San Francisco or something. But yeah. I mean, in the hobo code, I think like rule number 2 was like, if you're in town, you need to abide by the rules of the town, and like crust punks really don't do that. No, they don't even pretend to. Like I think that they want to like violate the rules.
They get pleasure out of like screaming their heads off and people turning their head.
Yeah, there's another word for them I learned from our past guest David. They're called oogles is another thing. But that is a light misnomer because people in this scene, they'll just call it like the scene or something. I think they might say crust sometimes, maybe in a self-referential way. But they call like posers oogles. It's their thing. Like, those are people who like don't actually live in a squatter's thing. Maybe they actually have a lease or something or a real job. So it's
couch surfing.
Yeah, it's a funny bit of gatekeeping. But yeah, I'm skeptical of them because it feels like they want like the benefits of living in a society, but then they want none of the responsibilities, and that always annoys me. When someone wants like the nice part and they don't want to do the hard part. That's just like a broad belief of mine.
Yeah, I have this phrase I like to say in my head often where I'm like, like if I don't like someone, I'll be like, if everyone in society acted like them, society would collapse.
Yeah.
It's like, and I am about to generalize, but not to generalize, but I feel like crust punks, oftentimes they might come from broken homes, but also feel like they come from the homes where like, if they can like come back in 10 years and they know their parents or their family like have a bed for them. And I always hate that kind of thing where like oftentimes people just get a sense like, oh, I am free to fall apart and other people are not.
They have a safety net, and so they know they can like do crazy stuff. Yeah. I've always sensed, you can like sense that about someone, that it's like, a lot of people don't have more daring because you can go back, like you can go off and live in Berlin and like that kind of stuff. Like you can just be caught up in cultural things because the consequences are just less. You can always go home. I just finished watching a documentary series, Love Has Won. And they interview like the people in this cult like immediately after the cult crashes, and then they interview them a year later, and then like in the month after it crashes, like, oh, you think just because our leader died this is all going to end, that our like work is done? Like, no, this is just the beginning. And then a year later it's like, I'm excited to see my mom. I haven't seen her in 15 years. One of them was like, you think I can go back to Florida after this? And then it's just like her driving in Florida as the next cut. But I went into too deep of a dive of the oogles crust punk world because it's surprisingly a bit of a digital footprint. I think the culture might be lightly on its way out. I don't have too much to attest to that. But there's a Vice article, Vice, more useful than I would give them credit for over the course of this podcast. I don't know. They've always come in clutch, it seems.
Yeah.
But they're interviewing this guy who ran a Tumblr called Look at This Fucking Oogle. And so that was a theme of Tumblr things. There was Look at This Fucking Hipster, which was one you just kind of take photos of people that really exemplified what you were kind of either lightly ribbing or really tearing into. But the guy himself is interesting. He's like a pretty prototypical kind of crusty. He's a musician. He just like started this blog. He like dropped out of school in the 9th grade. And he had this quote in here that I just copied wholesale. He's just talking to the interviewer and he says, "As I thought I was just like some homeless person until I moved in with my uncle. I didn't know there was a whole community or scene of people who just traveled. So he taught me about that. And I was just like, well, shit, that's what I want to do then. I don't want to live in a house and work. I can travel and work when I want." And so that's a hobo.
Yeah.
Like he arrived at it eventually. But these crusties, they all do look so similar. There's like crazy amounts of visual coherence. Like they're like a palette, basically. Like the way they get their colors so consistent. I mean, that is also just things become brown over time. So I shouldn't give them too much.
Yeah, when I view them in my head, it's all like beige and black with face tattoos, black caps too.
But yeah. And then, so another angle of like digital traveling kind of thing is I started going on the Vagabond subreddit as we studied this. And that's a mix of people trying to recreate hobo living and then crusties as well, I would say, who also travel. Because basically, like, I don't know at what point this started happening, but crusties started hopping freight trains. And that's when the conversion evolution was complete. Basically, they figured out that they could get to Denver. They could get, to like places that are warmer or colder as the year goes along these freight routes. And so when I started going to the Vagabond subreddit on like Thursday, everyone was asking about this guy, Shoestring, Hobo Shoestring. So he was a YouTuber actually, and he's a real hopping freight trains hobo. He would work and stuff as well. But on Thursday, he was like, everyone was asking where he was, and he was reported missing. And then we're recording this on a Monday, and on Saturday, I believe, his body was found. Sad. And so it's like such a thing to like learn who someone is and then learn they've died and then like start watching all their videos and stuff. And he's a fascinating guy. But one of the things he talks about is in a video from 2019, maybe, he says that 7 years ago or so, he started seeing the dirty kids out hopping the trains. And so like, that's maybe when that started happening, I guess. I don't know why this, he in a long video talks about how there was like, he saw no one on the trains after 9/11. Like maybe rail security was up and he was the only one who didn't care or something, or people like restructured their lives after 9/11 maybe. And like, I can't imagine someone who's like hopping trains and it's just like, oh my God, the World Trade Center was destroyed. I have to go back to my family. Like, I don't know if that was it or just a broader cultural shift, but Shoestring was hopping since like 87, basically. And he's just a fascinating guy. He's got this great Southern accent. And he talks about why he started hopping trains. He always loved trains. And he says in his very distinctive accent, I've also got the Asperger's and autism. I was diagnosed at a young age. And he talks about how like the rocking of the trains was just very soothing to him. And if that's the only thing pulling him to it, that's crazy.
Yeah, the train
it's
is
so
like,
much work. It's like you can like simulate this at home somehow with like a massage chair.
Yeah, the train is like a 20-ton stim toy.
Yeah, exactly. That can kill him at any time. He lost 2 fingers on his left hand from. I need to watch the video, but he has a video where he talks about that. But yeah, and he starts making these videos and they hit multiple million views. Basically, there's one video where he's saying like I'm experimenting with the thumbnails. I noticed that sometimes they get more or less views, and I'm like, oh my God, he's learning the algorithm. Like this is a guy's a hobo who's been hopping trains, and here he is. Like I noticed like some of his later thumbnails have him like mouth agape, kind of in the thumbnail thing. It's like he did it. Yeah. He figured it out. He figured out the YouTube thumbnail.
Wow, we're all becoming soy.
Exactly. But yeah, I just think that I don't know. I think it's such a loss because it seems like I don't know. I watched the Vice thing. I'm like, oh, hobos are dead. Like, but like Shoestring is only in his 50s, only like riding since the 80s. Like, I don't know. And he basically like he used lingo in his videos that is like perfect hobo lingo.
Yeah,
and
he referred to the code.
Yeah, he referred to the code. And one thing that really struck with me is he was looking to catch a train south, and was kind of just narrating his thoughts out loud. And he says like, oh, this train car, he's like, well, you know, if you see empty lumber cars, those are going to go north, you know, because lumber always travels south. But this train here is half empty, half full. Like, I don't know which way it's going to go. Like, I'm just hoping for south. And then you just watch the course of the video, and he's like, you're going to hear me either curse or hate or say yippee, depending on where this is going. And it ends up going south, and it's really cool. But he had such like how someone reads the waves or something, or reads the clouds. Like he could read the freight trains in that way. He understood kind of the system, like no matter how small he is as a single person, like, and this is lumber freight across America, like, but he understands like where he fits into that.
Which is a huge system. I mean, the freight rail system, as much as I deride class 4 railroaders, it's big. There are so many right-of-ways throughout the entire country.
Yeah. So I think I went up and down on whether there is like a future of hobos. I respect Krusties a little bit more now that I've heard them actually speak and I've read interviews with them. I think if they just clean themselves up a little bit more, maybe started singing more fun hobo songs, maybe it'd be more on their side. But it'd be nice if they kind of just like, if they dropped their current aesthetic and just became like 1910s hobos. I would love that if they started wearing like baggy suits and stuff.
Yeah. I mean, there's so many different elements of the hobo lifestyle: train travel, migratory work. I think different elements still exist in the current day. But no, I don't really think they're going to come back. I mean, the main thing, migratory work, in the digital era and the decreased need for manual labor, I just don't see the need.
Yeah. No, I think van life was maybe an attempt to capture that kind of American desire to wander. Yeah. But in this very protected, contained way where you always have a shower and a toilet and a Wi-Fi hotspot with you. You know, we're not willing to fully hobo it up and have nothing with us.
I mean, think about the transition from hobo to like expat Mexico City work from home people.
Yeah.
It's like, wow.
There's nothing there. I guess that's migratory work in a sense, but not really.
Not really, but just the standard of living. That's the biggest gulf I can think of between the two of them.
No.
Wow. Because that's like, I mean, like passage after passage I read in all the books for this week, poverty was on just like such a different level.
Yeah, no. But yeah, I don't know. This went a lot longer than I thought, but I don't know. I think we had a lot to say about hobos. I think it's just such a.
You mean the episode?
Yeah.
No, I thought we did it justice. I don't even think there's going to be like sections I need to trim from this week's episode because I think we're both so on point with this.
Yeah, I don't know. It kind of makes me want to travel a little bit more. Maybe I've been watching too many shoestring videos.
I mean, I've been trying to get you to go on an Amtrak trip with me.
Yeah, exactly. It's just taking the time off and all that.
For me, I have like a fair amount of vacation, sick, personal days, holidays with the city. I can make St. Louis work anytime.
It would be fun, actually. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that was also like as I was watching all these videos of shoestring stowing away on freight trains, I was just like, oh yeah, passenger trains exist. I kind of forgot about that for a second. I was like crazy. He has to do this. I'm like, he could pay $25 and get like decently far on the Amtrak, depending on the route.
No, Amtrak's pretty expensive because the trains are slow, which makes labor costs higher. I mean, Amtrak is still worth it in some cases. Like that is the way I would get to Milwaukee. That's the best way to get to Milwaukee. $25. But it's complex. But this was a fun episode. I feel like kind of a buzz now. I'm like, I need to lay down.
Yeah, no. Trying to think how to go out, but everyone, thanks for listening. Rest in peace, Hobo Shoestring.
Yeah, rest in peace. And then I think we might play the song Big Rock Candy Mountain now because it's in the public domain, so we can play it without getting in trouble. So, but thanks everyone for listening this week, and hope you have a good one. Bye.